Hey folks, Dave Brown here with the New Populist. Thank you again for joining me. Today I want to talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, I generally try to avoid doing too many videos on this topic because day to day, not a whole lot changes. You have one side getting a few kilometers one day, the other side counterattacks and they take it back. So day by day, there isn't a whole lot changing, and you just have both sides doing cheerleading. But in this case, we have an article from the New York Times that I think is worth covering. And as I pointed out in the past, and I'm not unique in this, the New York Times is essentially a mouthpiece for the Central Intelligence Agency, which is sad and unfortunate considering that the New York Times is supposed to be the paper of record when in reality they are nothing but a Operation Mockingbird asset. So with that in mind, we have this article titled, one second here, Troop Deaths and Injuries in Ukraine War Near 500,000 U.S. Officials Say. The total number of Ukrainian and Russian troops killed or wounded since the war in Ukraine began 18 months ago is nearing 500,000, U.S. officials said, a staggering toll as Russia assaults its next door neighbor and tries to seize more territory. The officials cautioned that casualty figures remained difficult to estimate because Moscow is believed to routinely undercount its war dead and injured, and Kyiv does not disclose official figures. But they said the slaughter intensified this year in eastern Ukraine and has continued at a steady clip as a nearly 3-month-old counteroffensive drags on. Russia's military casualties, the officials said, are approaching 300,000. This number includes as many as 120,000 deaths and 170,000 to 180,000 injured troops. The Russian numbers dwarf the Ukrainian figures, which the officials put at close to 70,000 killed and 100,000 to 120,000 wounded. Now, let me just stop right there. The idea that the Russian casualties dwarf the Ukrainian figures, that is just not realistic. And the reason that I pointed out before that we are downplaying the casualties is because they're trying to sell this war to the West. And even right now, the support in the United States is shaky. If the people in this country understood just how many Ukrainians were being killed in this war, that might shake support for this war. So, what I predict is going to happen is the same thing that happened with the lab leak theory or any other thing that the U.S. government has lied about. After a few years, when people have moved on from that event, they'll crawl back later and then quietly correct the figure and give you the real number. So we're going to find out maybe in 2025 or 2026, assuming this conflict is over. We're going to find out the real casualties for Ukraine were astronomically higher, and it will be really unsettling. But again, we will be focused somewhere else, your general public here in the U.S., and the people generally won't care that much. And that's very sad because right now it is, again, a slaughter in Ukraine. Now, the article continues, but Russians outnumber Ukrainians on the battlefield almost 3-1, and Russia has a larger population from which to replenish its ranks. Ukraine has around 500,000 troops, including active duty reserve and paramilitary troops, according to analysis. By contrast, Russia has almost tripled that number with 1,330,000 active duty reserve and paramilitary troops, most of the latter from the Wagner Group. Now, where do they get these numbers? 500,000 for Ukraine. Well, they pulled it from the website Statistica, where estimates that Ukraine here has 500,000 troops. Just one problem. Last year, Reznikov, the defense minister for Ukraine, says here we have approximately 700,000 in the armed forces, and when you add in National Guard, police, and border guard, we are around a million strong. So either one of these are wrong, or if they're both right, that would mean that Ukraine has suffered closer to 500,000 casualties. So anytime you look at the figures, you look around, you see a lot of different conflicts. And so the New York Times is trying to say that there's 500,000 based off of what Statistica says. And then we have the actual defense minister saying, well, this is last year, July, we have almost a million people. So which one is true? We really don't know. And back to this issue of, it says 3-1 here. That's the number, 3-1, Russia to Ukraine. Is that, again, accurate? The invasion force in Russia or in Ukraine for Russia back in February 2022 was about 180,000 plus the DPR, LPR militias and the Chechens and Wagners. And they really didn't have that many forces in Ukraine, which is why when Ukraine counterattacked in the fall, the Russians had to fall back because they simply didn't have that much personnel. And that led to that partial mobilization in September of 300,000 Russian troops. So the idea that on the battlefield, that Russia enjoys a 3-1 advantage, I don't think that bears out. And that's part of the problem here. Russia is doing fairly well, and they don't have that massive troop advantage. What is it? Is it 2-1, 1.5-1? Some estimates have Russia at around 700,000 within Ukraine. That would be reasonable considering how long the front is, and of course they have people in the rear. Not every troop is on the line of contact in combat. Most of your troops are actually in support. So 700,000 is not unreasonable, but I don't think that Russia has that 3-1 advantage. The article continues. The estimated figures for Ukraine and Russia are based on satellite imagery, communication intercepts, social media, and news media dispatches from reporters in the country, as well as official reporting from both governments. Estimates vary even within the U.S. government. According to Pentagon documents leaked in the spring, Russia had suffered 189,500 to 223,000 casualties, including up to 43,000 killed in action. One document said that as of February, Ukraine had suffered 124,500 to 131,000 casualties, with as many as 17,500 killed in action. Now, if you believe that after a year of war, February to February, that Ukraine lost 7,000 troops, I mean, that's so crazy that it's not even worth mentioning. But here, the New York Times thinks it's worth mentioning. Again, preposterous at every level to have that even suggested. Of course, we've noticed too that oftentimes the Pentagon and Western sources will simply regurgitate whatever Ukrainian MOD tells them, and they repeat it uncritically, willfully being blind to the fact that it's not true, and they know it's complete garbage. And here in the article, it really just kind of throws a grenade on all the previous totals. The estimates vary so widely, partly because of Ukraine's reluctance to disclose its wartime losses, even to the American government. U.S. intelligence analysts have also spent much more time focusing on Russian casualties than those of Ukraine, their ally. So, Ukraine won't tell us, and we don't care. We want to focus on Russia. So all these estimates, these calculations, and here they're basically saying, yeah, it's garbage. You can't really believe it because They're not going to tell us, and we don't care. And again, we will find out the real numbers in about 2 to 3 years after this conflict's over, and it will be horrifying when we find out what the real numbers are. Now, back to this counteroffensive, and this is what I've asked people to explain to me. Let's say, for example, it's true that Russia has a 3-to-1 advantage. They have a 3-to-1 advantage in men. They spent the last 8 months building up here these defense lines, these 3 defense lines that we, the Surovikin line, and they have air superiority, and the Ukrainians, basically don't really have an air force to fight with. How is Ukraine supposed to launch an effective counteroffensive with these details here? Down 3-to-1, no air power, into a well-prepared layered defense line. How are they supposed to do that and actually make any significant progress? Explain that to me. Even if you're not a military strategist, it would seem pretty obvious that they have no chance, and what we've seen the last couple months pretty much shows that. It's been an absolute catastrophe. They have barely done anything. They're not even at the first line of defense. They're in that crumple zone, that gray zone, where Russia will move up and fall back and put Ukrainians into a fire bag. And so this offensive has gone nowhere, and no one really has explained to me, or explained in detail or in a rational way, how Ukraine is supposed to do this, considering these numbers here with their manpower being down 3-to-1, allegedly, and then no air power, defense lines, lack of ammunition. They can't get 155 shells. They're throwing out the cluster munitions now. How are they supposed to win? And recent article said that the 82nd Brigade, the most powerful brigade in the Ukrainian military, or one of them, has finally joined the counteroffensive. And what they point out in this article, written by Dave Axe, who's a huge pro-Ukraine guy, he even admits at the end, if Russians in Robatny can hold their ground and endure what is likely to be a major but temporary surge in Ukrainian combat power, they might eventually find themselves in a position to strike back at Ukrainians once the surge brigades rotate off the front line without replacement. So they're throwing their best units at this counteroffensive 2 months in, a counteroffensive that has gone nowhere. And after this 82nd, what do they have left? That's the problem. They don't have anything left. And does this mean that Russia is going to go on this big hour offensive? Probably not. People have been predicting that for a year and a half now, and it hasn't happened. It seems they simply aren't interested. They're going to move at their own pace with their own plans, whatever they might be. They're not concerned with optics. They're concerned with winning, and they will do what is best for them strategically. They're not going to just throw a bunch of guys at a counteroffensive just to grab headlines and to make a splash. Now, despite all these things I've said about the lack of manpower, ammunition, defense lines, all that stuff, the Institute for the Study of War, one of my favorite think tanks, the very, very pro-Ukraine think tank that was founded by Jennifer Kagan, who was the sister-in-law of Victoria Nuland, they are doing what's called coping. They're coping very hard. And so they say in this recent assessment that, yes, the U.S. intelligence community has assessed that this counteroffensive has been quite, a failure, but they're saying it's unclear from published reports why U.S. intelligence analysts have reportedly concluded that seizing Melitopol is the only way Ukraine can sever the Russian land bridge. ISW has, in fact, assessed that Ukraine has many options for severing critical Russian ground lines of communication along the northern sea of Azov coast, of which the seizure of Melitopol is only one. They are coping hard. They're saying, oh, come on, U.S. intelligence community, we have these other assessments here that we've written where Ukraine could do all these things. I'm gonna actually go with the U.S. intelligence on this one. people there, again, I've said before, they're full of liars and propagandists. But there is that little trickle now of some people there going, this ain't working. Because even if you're, again, not locked into this conflict and you just turn the TV on and see what's happening, Ukraine isn't making the progress that what we were promised. It's been 2 months in now. And again, what's going to change here for them to all of a sudden just plunge forward and drive the Russians from the Donbass? What's going to change? The answer is nothing. And so the reality is this conflict, it's not over. We will continue to give Ukraine weapons. We'll continue to pay their government. And it will drag on. But at some point, even the general public might have to arrive at this conclusion that this Ukraine can't win. And if they can't win, what's the point of just having mobilization after mobilization where you're kidnapping guys off the street, giving them 3 weeks of training, and then pushing them to the front just to get killed? What is the point of that? And that's what I've asked. And that's not a pro-Kremlin talking point. I feel that's a humanitarian talking point. If you can't win, and you're just basically banging your head against the wall, and people are dying in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and ultimately that needs to stop. And you look back at the other wars that we've financed, we've propped up. One of the latest ones, the conflict in Syria. We spent years trying to oust Bashar al-Assad. It failed, and here we are, 12 years later since that conflict began. In either was it 2011 or 2013? I can't remember which one. But it's been a long time. Bashar al-Assad is still in power. Just now you have hundreds of thousands dead. And the question is, was it worth the United States supporting that proxy war, supporting the rebels in Syria? Was it worth us doing that? What did we gain here? I would say nothing. And we just got a bunch of people killed. And the same thing is happening in Ukraine. We are just ultimately getting a bunch of people killed. And when this conflict comes to an end, these neocons in Washington, D.C., they'll go, oh, well, they'll turn the page, and then they'll go, zoop, Taiwan, China, next up. They don't really care about people dying in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are cannon fodder. They're a tool to go after Russia. And that's what's so sad. It's not a pro-Russian talking point to point this out. It's recognizing the reality of the situation and understanding that people are dying that don't need to die. And it's just very sad that the United States government is supporting this very callously, like they have other conflicts in the past over the last several decades. But that is what we, the United States, do. Well, that's it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.